When ruthless businessman Caio Ferraz sets his sights on demolishing a small house to complete his luxury development, he expects easy victory over its owner, a humble schoolteacher named Julia Mora. But 3 whispered words will shatter his world and reveal a connection he never knew existed. Sometimes the past holds the key to healing the present, and sometimes love grows in the most unexpected places. This is a story of second chances, family secrets, and discovering that some things are worth more than money. Before we start this story, comment below from where you are watching us. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Caio Ferraz's penthouse office. At 30 years old, he was already one of the most feared businessmen in the city. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his custom-made suit showed off his athletic build. He stood looking down at the city below, his city as he liked to think of it. "Mr. Ferraz, the board is ready for you," said his assistant Maria from the doorway. Caio didn't turn around. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes." "Yes, sir," Maria replied, closing the door quietly behind her. Caio picked up the architectural model on his desk. The Serra Vista luxury complex would be his greatest achievement yet, a sprawling development of high-end condos, boutique shops, and 5-star restaurants. Only one thing stood in his way, a small, dilapidated house right in the middle of his future empire. He had bought out everyone else in the neighborhood. Some had been easy, they took his generous offers and left. Others required more persuasion, threatening to cut off water access here, suggesting building code violations there. In the end, they all gave in. All except one. Caio's jaw tightened as he thought about Julia Mora, the stubborn schoolteacher who refused to sell her grandmother's house. He had never even met her. His lawyers handled all the negotiations, but today, that would change. Today was the final public hearing, and she would have to face him in person. "She'll crack," he muttered to himself, straightening his tie in the reflection of the window. They always do. Across town, Julia Mora stood in front of her classroom of first graders. At 27, she had been teaching for 5 years at the local elementary school. Her soft brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her kind eyes watched as her students worked on their art projects. "Miss Mora, look at my drawing," called out little Emma, holding up a colorful picture. "It's beautiful, Emma," Julia said with a warm smile, kneeling down beside the girl's desk. "Is that your house?" "Yes, and that's my mom and dad, and my dog Peanut." Julia felt a pang in her heart. How could she explain to these children that some of them might have to leave their homes and schools because of Caio Ferraz's development plans? The clock on the wall showed 2:30 p.m. The hearing was at 4 acts. She had already arranged for a substitute teacher to take over her class for the rest of the day. "Miss Santos will be here soon to finish the day with you," Julia told her students. "I want you all to be on your best behavior, okay?" "Where are you going, Miss Mora?" asked one of the boys. Julia hesitated. "I have an important meeting about my grandmother's house." "Is your grandma okay?" another child asked innocently. "My grandmother isn't with us anymore," Julia explained gently, "but she left me her house and it's very special to me. There's a man who wants to buy it, but I don't want to sell it." "Then don't," Emma said simply. "If you love it, you should keep it," Julia smiled. "That's what I'm going to try to do." After the substitute arrived, Julia hurried to her small apartment to change. She didn't have fancy clothes like the lawyers and business people would be wearing, but she had one decent dress, a simple blue one that her grandmother had given her for her college graduation. It was a bit faded now, but it would have to do. As she dressed, Julia's eyes fell on the old wooden box on her dresser. Inside was the letter she had found among her grandmother Cecilia's things after she died. She had only discovered it last week, while going through some old papers. The letter was yellowed with age, and the handwriting was shaky, but the signature at the bottom had made Julia's heart stop. Isabella Ferraz, Caio Ferraz's mother. The letter had explained everything. How Isabella, dying of cancer and abandoned by her wealthy husband, had found kindness and dignity in the care of Cecilia Mora, a nurse who had taken her into her own home during her final days. How Isabella had worried about her young son, Caio, who was being raised by his cold, ruthless father. how she feared what he might become without her love to guide him. Julia carefully placed the letter in a folder and took a deep breath. She had no idea if it would make any difference, but it was all she had. The City Hall meeting room was packed with reporters, investors, and curious locals. Caio sat at one end of a long table, surrounded by his legal team. His expression was confident, almost bored, as he checked his watch impatiently. "Where is she?" he asked his head lawyer, Richard Thompson. "She'll be here," Richard assured him. "The hearing can't proceed without her." Just then the doors opened and Julia walked in. Caio straightened up slightly, surprised by her appearance. He had expected someone older, perhaps more frail-looking. Instead, he saw a young woman with determined eyes and a quiet dignity about her despite her simple dress and lack of expensive accessories. The mayor called the meeting to order. "We're here today for the final hearing regarding the Serra Vista development project. Mr. Ferraz's company has acquired all properties in the designated area except for one, 145 Maple Street, owned by Ms. Julia Mora." Richard stood up. "My client has made multiple generous offers for the property, all of which Ms. Mora has rejected without explanation. We're asking the City Council to consider invoking eminent domain, as this development will bring significant economic benefits to the community." The mayor turned to Julia. "Ms. Mora, would you like to respond?" Julia stood up, clutching her folder. "I understand that Mr. Ferraz's project would bring money to the city, but that neighborhood has been home to families for generations. My grandmother's house may not look like much to you, but it holds memories that can't be replaced with luxury condos." Caio leaned forward, his voice smooth but cold. "Ms. Mora, I'm offering you 3 times the market value for a house that's falling apart. Be reasonable. You can buy a much nicer place with that money." "Some things aren't for sale, Mr. Ferraz," Julia replied quietly. Caio's smile was shark-like. "Everything has a price." The mayor sighed. "If we can't reach an agreement, the council will vote on whether to proceed with eminent domain. Before we do that, do either of you have anything else to add?" Richard slid a contract across the table. "For the record, this is our final offer. If Ms. Mora signs today, we'll increase the compensation by an additional 15%. Caio pulled out an expensive pen, ready to sign his part of the contract. The room went quiet as all eyes turned to Julia. She looked directly at Caio for a long moment, then slowly walked around the table until she was standing right beside him. He looked up at her, irritated by her proximity. Julia leaned down and whispered 3 simple words. "She knew you." The color drained from Caio's face. "What did you say?" Without answering, Julia opened her folder and carefully placed the old letter in front of him. Caio's hands trembled slightly as he recognized the handwriting. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, his voice barely audible. "It was among my grandmother's things," Julia said softly. "Cecilia Mura, the nurse who cared for your mother in her final days." Caio stared at the letter, reading his mother's words. The meeting room faded away as memories flooded back. His mother's gentle voice, her absence, the cold emptiness that followed. He had been only 8 years old when she died. "Your mother spent her last weeks in my grandmother's house, the house you want to tear down," Julia continued quietly. "She said it was the only place where she felt at peace." The reporters in the room sensed something happening, but couldn't hear the whispered exchange. Richard leaned toward Caio, confused by his client's sudden change in demeanor. "Mr. Ferraz, shall we proceed with the signing?" Caio looked up at Julia, seeing her, really seeing her, for the first time. Then, in one swift motion, he tore the contract in half. "The deal's off," he announced, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent room. Gasps and murmurs erupted. Richard started to protest, but Caio silenced him with a look. "Ms. Mora keeps her house. The project will be redesigned to work around it." "But, sir, the investors," Richard began. "I said the deal's off," Caio repeated firmly, standing up. He carefully folded his mother's letter and handed it back to Julia. "Thank you," he said simply. The meeting dissolved into chaos as reporters rushed forward with questions, and Caio's team huddled in shocked consultation. But Caio's eyes remained on Julia, as she quietly gathered her things and slipped out of the room. For 3 days, Kaio couldn't get Julia out of his mind. The woman who had brought his mother back to him with 3 simple words. The woman who had made him feel something other than the cold determination that had driven him for years. He found himself driving past her grandmother's house, slowing down to look at the small garden in front, the faded blue shutters, the porch swing. Had his mother really found peace here? What had her final days been like? There were so many questions he wanted to ask. Things about his mother that his father had refused to discuss, memories he had been too young to hold on to. Finally, on the 4th day, Kaio made a decision. He stopped at a small art supply store and bought a box of colored chalk, the kind teachers use. Then he drove to Lincoln Elementary School and waited in the parking lot until the final bell rang. As children streamed out of the building, followed by their teachers, he spotted Julia. She was helping a small boy tie his shoelaces, laughing at something he said. Kaio got out of his car, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't felt since he was a boy. He waited until the children had all gone, then approached her holding the chalk and his mother's letter, which Julia had returned to him at the end of the meeting. Julia looked up, surprised to see him there. "Mr. Faraz," she said cautiously. "Kaio," he corrected her. "Please call me Kaio." She nodded, waiting. "I thought you might need this," he said awkwardly, holding out the box of chalk. "For your classroom." A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Thank you." He took a deep breath. "I was wondering, what else did she tell you? Your grandmother, I mean." "About my mother." Julia's expression softened. "I didn't know your mother personally. I was just a baby when but my grandmother kept a journal, and there are photos." Hope flickered in Kaio's eyes. Would you show me?" Julia hesitated, studying his face. The arrogant businessman from the hearing was gone, replaced by someone vulnerable, someone searching for a connection to his past. "Yes," she finally said. "I think she would have wanted that." As they walked together toward the parking lot, neither of them noticed the sleek black car parked across the street, or the man inside taking photos of them with a telephoto lens. "This isn't over, Kaio," the man muttered, sending the photos to a contact labeled only as VP. "You're going to regret crossing us." "I can't believe I'm doing this," Julia said to herself as she straightened up her grandmother's living room. She had agreed to meet Kaio here at the house he had tried so hard to demolish. The irony wasn't lost on her. She looked around at the worn furniture, the faded curtains, the old photographs on the walls. For the first time, she saw it through a stranger's eyes, small, outdated, humble, nothing like the luxury Kaio Faraz was used to. The doorbell rang, startling her out of her thoughts. She smoothed her simple cotton dress and took a deep breath before opening the door. Kaio stood on the porch, looking different than he had at the school. He had traded his business suit for jeans and a casual button-down shirt. In his hands was a bouquet of white lilies. "These were her favorite," he said, offering the flowers to Julia. "My mother's, I mean." Julia's eyes widened. "How did you know that?" "I remembered," Kaio said softly. "One of the few things I do remember about her." She accepted the flowers with a nod. "Please, come in." Kaio stepped inside, his eyes taking in every detail of the modest home. His gaze lingered on a small table by the window, where a collection of seashells was displayed. "She used to collect those," Julia explained, following his gaze. "My grandmother, I mean. She said each one told a story." Kaio nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The house felt so different from what he had imagined. It wasn't just an obstacle to his development plans anymore. It was a home filled with memories and warmth. "Would you like some coffee?" Julia offered, heading toward the kitchen. "Yes, thank you," Kaio replied, still looking around. In the kitchen, Julia put on the kettle and arranged some cookies on a plate. Through the doorway, she could see Kaio examining the photographs on the living room wall. He stopped in front of one particular frame, his body going still. When she returned with the coffee tray, he was still staring at the photo. "That's her, isn't it?" Julia asked gently. "Your mother." The photograph showed 2 women sitting on the porch swing outside. One was Julia's grandmother, Cecilia, younger than Julia had ever known her. The other was a delicate woman with Kayo's same dark eyes, her face thin but smiling. "Yes," Kayo said, his voice rough with emotion. "I haven't seen a picture of her in years. My father, he got rid of them all after she died." Julia set the tray down on the coffee table. "There are more, and her journal, like I mentioned. Would you like to see them?" Kayo nodded, unable to speak. Julia went to an old cedar chest in the corner of the room and opened it. Inside were several photo albums and a worn leather journal. She brought them to the coffee table and sat beside Kayo on the sofa. "My grandmother kept everything," she explained, opening the first album. "She was like that, believed every moment was worth remembering." For the next hour, they went through the photos together. There weren't many of Isabella, perhaps a dozen in total, but each one was like a treasure to Kayo. His mother in the garden helping Cecilia plant flowers, his mother reading a book on the porch swing, his mother smiling despite the illness that was clearly taking its toll. "She looks happy here," Kayo said, touching one of the photos gently. "I don't remember her being happy at the end." "According to my grandmother's journal, she found peace here," Julia said, opening the leather-bound book. "Let me find the part." She flipped through the pages until she found what she was looking for. "Here," she said, reading aloud. "Isabella's health is declining, but her spirit grows stronger each day. She talks about her son constantly, her little lion, she calls him. She says he has his father's strength, but her heart, and that's what will save him in the end." Kayo's breath caught. "She called me that, her little lion. I'd forgotten." Julia continued reading. "She worries what will become of him after she's gone. Her husband is a hard man who sees vulnerability as weakness. She fears the boy will lose himself trying to become what his father wants." The words hung in the air between them. Kayo stood up suddenly, walking to the window. "She was right to worry," he said after a long moment. "My father made sure I became exactly what he wanted. Ruthless, calculating, successful at any cost." "Not exactly," Julia said quietly. "You tore up that contract." Kayo turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. One moment of weakness. Or strength, Julia suggested. "It takes more courage to change course than to stay on a path you know is wrong." Before Kayo could respond, his phone rang. He checked the caller ID and frowned. "I need to take this," he said, stepping onto the porch for privacy. Julia couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see Kayo's body language change through the window, his shoulders tensing, his free hand clenching into a fist. When he came back inside, his face had hardened back into the mask she recognized from the hearing. "I have to go," he said curtly. "There's a situation at the office." "Of course," Julia replied, trying to hide her disappointment. "Is everything all right?" "Nothing I can't handle," Kayo said, already moving toward the door. He paused, looking back at the photo albums on the coffee table. "Thank you for this. It meant a lot." "You can come back," Julia offered. "Anytime you want to see more or just talk." Something flickered in Kayo's eyes, vulnerability quickly masked by determination. "I'd like that," he said, his voice softer than before. Then he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. "What do you mean the investors are pulling out?" Kayo demanded, pacing his office later that evening. Richard Thompson and the rest of his legal team sat around the conference table looking uncomfortable. "The news about you canceling the Serra Vista project has spooked them," Richard explained. "Vale Properties is offering to buy them out of their contracts with us." "Vale Properties?" Kayo stopped pacing. "Eduardo Vale is behind this." "It appears so," Richard confirmed. "He's been waiting for you to make a mistake, and he thinks this is it." Kayo's jaw tightened. Eduardo Vale had been his father's business partner before a bitter falling out split their company in two. The rivalry had continued into the next generation, with Eduardo making no secret of his desire to see Kayo fail. "This isn't just about the investors," added Sarah Chen, Kayo's finance director. "Your board of directors is calling for an emergency meeting tomorrow. They're concerned about your state of mind." "My state of mind?" Kayo repeated incredulously. "You tore up a multi-million-dollar contract in front of reporters," Richard pointed out, "over a worthless piece of property. People are talking." Kayo's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced down at it and froze. It was from an unknown number, but the content made his blood run cold. A photo of him and Julia walking together outside her school with the caption, "Is this why Farah's empire is crumbling? Wait till the board sees who's really calling the shots." "Who sent this to you?" Sarah asked, noticing his expression. Kaio quickly put the phone away. "No one important. Look, I need you all to calm the investors. Tell them I'm restructuring the Serra Vista project, not cancelling it. We'll build around the Mura property. That will increase costs by at least 30%, Sarah warned. Then find ways to cut costs elsewhere, Kaio snapped. That's what I pay you for." After the team left, Kaio remained in his office, staring out at the city lights. His empire, everything he had built, everything his father had expected of him was at risk. And for what? Sentimentality over a mother he barely remembered, the pleading eyes of a schoolteacher. He picked up his phone and scrolled to the threatening message again. Someone was watching him, using his moment of weakness against him. It had to be Vale. His thumb hovered over Julia's number, which he had gotten from her earlier. He wanted to warn her, to make sure she was safe. But another part of him, the cold, calculating part his father had cultivated, wondered if it wouldn't be better to cut all ties with her now, before more damage was done. In the end, he put the phone down without calling. He had a board, meeting to prepare for, an empire to save. There was no room for distraction. Julia couldn't sleep that night. Meeting with Kaio had stirred up complicated feelings. When she had first whispered those 3 words to him at the hearing, she had only wanted to save her grandmother's house. She hadn't expected to see the pain in his eyes, or to feel the strange connection that had formed between them as they looked through the old photographs together. She got up and made herself a cup of tea, then sat on the porch swing where Isabella Ferraz had once found peace. The night was quiet, the street empty, or so she thought. A car drove slowly past the B house, then circled back and parked across the street. Julia tensed, watching as a man got out and approached her gate. In the dim light of the street lamp, she could see he was tall, well-dressed, and probably in his 60s. "Ms. Mura," the man called. "May I speak with you?" Julia stayed on the porch, not inviting him in. "Who are you?" "Eduardo Valle," the man replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I believe we have a mutual acquaintance, Kaio Ferraz." Julia's guard went up immediately. "It's very late, Mr. Vale." "I apologize for the hour," he said, though he didn't sound sorry at all. "But I have a proposition that won't wait until morning, may I?" He gestured to the porch steps. Against her better judgment, Julia nodded. Vale climbed the steps, but remained standing, looking down at her. "I'm prepared to offer you $5 million for this property," he said without preamble. "That's more than twice what Ferraz offered you." Julia nearly choked on her tea. "What?" $5 million, Vale repeated. "Cash. No complicated contracts. No lawyers. You sign the deed over to me tomorrow and the money is yours." "Why would you offer so much?" Julia asked suspiciously. "This house isn't worth even a fraction of that." Vale's smile widened. "Let's just say its strategic value has recently increased. You've become a person of interest to Kaio Ferraz. That makes you valuable to me." Julia stood up, anger replacing her shock. "I'm not for sale, Mr. Vale, and neither is this house. Please leave." Vale's expression hardened. "Don't be a fool, Ms. Mura. Kaio Ferraz doesn't care about you or this ramshackle house. He's using you to salvage his public image after that scene at the hearing. Once he's done, he'll disappear from your life as suddenly as he entered it." "That's none of your business," Julia replied firmly. "Good night, Mr. Valle." Vale reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, placing it on the porch railing. "When you come to your senses, call me. My offer expires in 48 hours. As he walked back to his car, Vale called over his shoulder. "By the way, you might want to check tomorrow's business news. I think you'll find it educational." Julia watched his car drive away, her hands trembling slightly. She picked up Vale's card, intending to tear it up, but then slipped it into her pocket instead. Something told her she might need to remember his name. Inside, she picked up her phone, thinking she should warn Kaio about Vale's visit. But what if Vale was right? What if Kaio was just using her somehow? They had shared one meaningful afternoon. But that didn't mean she really knew him or his intentions. She put the phone down without calling and went back to bed. But sleep remained elusive as her mind filled with questions about Caio Ferraz, the man whose empire might be crumbling because of 3 simple words she had whispered. Julia was pouring cereal for breakfast when her phone rang. It was Marta, a fellow teacher at Lincoln Elementary. "Julia, have you seen the news?" Marta's voice was high with excitement. "No, what happened?" Julia asked, turning on her small kitchen TV and flipping to the local news channel. "It's all over the business section. That developer, the one who wanted to buy your house, his company is in trouble. And guess what? They're saying it's because of you." Julia nearly dropped her phone as she saw Caio's face on the screen. The headline scrolling beneath read, "Ferraz Empire in Crisis. Board meeting called after CEO's shocking decision." "I'll call you back," Julia told Marta, hanging up as she turned up the volume. Sources close to Ferraz Developments say the EVE board is questioning Caio Ferraz's leadership after he abruptly cancelled the Serra Vista project last week, the reporter was saying. The company's stock has dropped 15% since the announcement, and major investors are rumored to be pulling out. The screen cut to footage from the public hearing. Caio tearing up the contract, the shocked faces of his legal team, and then a shot of Julia leaving the room. The unexpected decision came after a private conversation with local schoolteacher Julia Moura, who refused to sell her property to make way for the development. Speculation is running wild about the nature of their relationship and what she might have said to change the notoriously ruthless businessman's mind. Julia sank into a chair, her breakfast forgotten. This was what Eduardo Vale had meant about checking the news. They were making it sound like she had some kind of power over Caio, when all she'd done was show him a letter from his mother. Her phone rang again. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Ms. Moura." It was Eduardo Vale's smooth voice. "I trust you've seen the morning news." "What did you do?" Julia demanded. Vale chuckled. "I merely helped the press connect some dots. Caio Ferraz, the city's most ruthless developer, tears up a multi-million-dollar contract after a whispered conversation with a pretty schoolteacher. People love that kind of story." "It's not what you're implying," Julia protested. "Isn't it?" Vale's voice hardened. "The board meeting starts in an hour. By noon, Caio could be voted out of his own company, the company his father built. Unless... What? Unless you accept my offer for your property. I'll make the announcement immediately, shifting attention away from Caio's lapse in judgment. The narrative changes from Ferraz cancels project to Vale acquires final property. His board calms down, his investors return, and everyone moves on." Julia's mind raced. "And if I don't, then I release the photos of you two looking very cozy outside your school. I suggest to the press that perhaps Caio's interest in you goes beyond business. The board will have no choice but to remove him for conflict of interest." "That's blackmail," Julia said, her voice shaking with anger. "That's business," Vale corrected smoothly. "You have until noon. The money or the man, Ms. Moura. Your choice." The line went dead. Julia sat frozen, Vale's ultimatum echoing in her mind. The money or the man. As if Caio Ferraz was hers to save or sacrifice, her phone rang again. This time it was Caio. "Have you seen the news?" he asked without preamble, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Yes," Julia replied. "Caio, Eduardo Vale came to see me last night." "Stay away from Vale," Caio cut her off. "He's dangerous. He'll say anything, promise anything to get what he wants. He offered me $5 million for the house," Julia said quietly. There was a long pause. "Are you going to take it?" The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken implications. "I don't know," Julia admitted. "He said if I don't sell to him by noon, he'll release photos of us together and suggest things. He said your board would remove you." Caio's laugh was bitter. "Vale's always been thorough. Don't worry about me, Julia. I can handle my board and Vale's schemes. But your company is just a company," Caio finished. "Look, I need to go. The board is waiting. Whatever you decide about Vale's offer, I'll understand. This isn't your fight," but somehow it felt like it was. "Caio, wait. I have to go," he repeated. Then, more softly, "Thank you, Julia." for showing me those photos, for reminding me there are more important things than business deals. The line went dead, leaving Julia staring at her phone. The clock on her wall showed 8:45 a.m., just over 3 hours to make her decision. Caio straightened his tie as he prepared to enter the boardroom. His assistant, Maria, gave him an encouraging nod. "The lawyers are ready with the new plans for Serra Vista," she told him, handing him a leather portfolio. "The financial team has the cost projections." "And Richard?" Caio asked, referring to his head lawyer. Maria hesitated. "He's already in there with Mr. Vale." Caio's expression darkened. "Vale is here. He arrived 20 minutes ago. As a minority shareholder, he has the right to attend. Of course." Vale had been quietly buying up shares of Ferraz Developments for years. Never enough to take control, but enough to be a thorn in Caio's side when it suited him. "Sir," Maria said hesitantly, "there's something else you should know. Your father called." Caio froze. Antonio Ferraz had retired to Europe 5 years ago, leaving the company in Caio's hands. They rarely spoke, an arrangement that suited them both. What did he want? He didn't say, just that he'd be calling into the board meeting. Perfect. His father, the board, Vale, all gathered to witness his humiliation. Caio took a deep breath, centering himself. He had prepared for this, had contingency plans ready. He would not lose the company his father had built, the company that had become his entire identity. He pushed open the boardroom doors. 12 faces turned to look at him, 10 board members, Richard Thompson and Eduardo Vale, who smiled like a shark scenting blood. "Gentlemen," Caio greeted them coolly, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Shall we begin?" The next 2 hours were brutal. Financial reports showing investor flight, legal analysis of the potential losses from redesigning Serra Vista around Julia's property, concerns about erratic decision-making, and emotional leadership. Through it all, Vale sat silently, his smile never wavering. He was enjoying this, watching Caio fight for his professional life. Finally, the board chairman, Henry Williams, cleared his throat. "Before we vote on next steps, I believe Mr. Vale has requested the floor." Vale stood, buttoning his expensive suit jacket. "Thank you, Henry. Members of the board, I know you're concerned about Caio's recent change of heart regarding the Serra Vista project, and rightly so. It was an impulsive decision that has cost this company millions in market value." Caio kept his expression neutral, though his hands clenched under the table. "However," Vale continued, "I believe there may be a simple solution. My company, Vale Properties, is prepared to purchase the Mura property, the final piece of land needed for the original Serra Vista design. Once acquired, we would transfer ownership to Ferraz Developments for a nominal fee, allowing the project to proceed as originally planned." Murmurs of approval rippled around the table. Caio's eyes narrowed. "That's very generous, Eduardo," he said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "What's the catch?" Vale's smile widened. "In exchange, Vale Properties would become a partner in the Serra Vista development. A 40% stake seems fair given the circumstances." The board erupted in discussion. 40% was highway robbery, but if it saved the project... Caio stood up. "That won't be necessary." All eyes turned to him. "I've already prepared alternative plans for Serra Vista," Caio explained, opening the portfolio Maria had given him. "Yes, building around the Mura property will increase costs by approximately 30%, but our marketing team believes the story of preserving a historic home within a modern development will actually increase property values in the long run." He distributed copies of the new designs to each board member. "The architectural team has created something unique, a luxury development that honors the community's history rather than erasing it. Early focus groups have responded extremely positively." The board members studied the plans with interest. Vale's smile faded slightly. "An interesting concept," he conceded, "but it doesn't address the underlying concern, your judgment, Caio. What guarantee does the board have that you won't make another impulsive decision that threatens the company?" Before Caio could respond, the speakerphone in the center of the table beeped. The chairman pressed a button. Antonio Ferraz is on the line, he announced. Caio steeled himself. His father's voice, still commanding despite his age, filled the room. I've been listening to this discussion with great interest, Antonio Ferraz said, and I must say, I'm disappointed. Caio felt the old familiar weight of his father's disapproval. Not in my son, Antonio continued, surprising everyone, but in this board. You've allowed Eduardo Vale to manipulate this situation from the beginning. The press leaks, the investor panic. It all reeks of his methods. Vale's face hardened. Antonio, you're speaking from retirement. You don't have all the facts. I have enough, Antonio cut him off. I've reviewed Caio's new plans for Serra Vista. They're bold, innovative, and exactly the kind of thinking this company needs to move forward in changing times. Caio couldn't hide his shock. His father had never praised his work so openly. 30 years ago, Antonio continued, Eduardo and I had a similar disagreement. I wanted to preserve and incorporate the old central library into our downtown development. He wanted to tear it down and start fresh. I prevailed, and that project went on to win awards and set new standards for urban renewal. The board members nodded, remembering. The Central Plaza development was still one of the company's crown jewels. My son has made the right call here, both ethically and financially, Antonio concluded. I urge this board to support him. And Eduardo, stop trying to steal my company through the back door. It didn't work 30 years ago, and it won't work now. The line went dead. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Henry Williams cleared his throat. Well, I think we've heard enough. All in favor of proceeding with Caio's revised plan for Serra Vista? 10 hands went up. Vale stood, his face tight with barely controlled rage. This isn't over, Caio, he said quietly, before striding out of the room. Caio knew he was right. Vale never gave up easily, but for now he had won. As the board meeting concluded and members filed out with congratulations and renewed confidence, Caio checked his watch. 11:45 a.m. Julia had 15 minutes left to make her decision about Vale's offer. He pulled out his phone to call her, then hesitated. This had to be her choice, not influenced by his victory in the boardroom. If she took Vale's money and left, so be it. He wouldn't blame her. But God, he hoped she wouldn't. Julia sat on her grandmother's porch swing, Vale's business card in one hand, her phone in the other. The deadline was approaching and she still hadn't decided. $5 million was life-changing money. She could buy a newer, bigger house, create a scholarship, fund at her school, travel the world, never worry about money again. All she had to do was give up this old house and whatever connection she was beginning to feel with Caio Ferraz. A car pulled up in front of the house and Julia tensed, expecting to see Vale returning for her answer. Instead, a sleek, black town car stopped and an elderly driver got out to open the rear door. A tall, distinguished man with silver hair emerged, leaning heavily on a cane. Though she had never met him, Julia recognized Antonio Ferraz from news photos. Caio had his father's strong jawline and intense eyes. Antonio made his way slowly up the path to her porch. Julia stood, unsure what to expect. Ms. Moura, he greeted her, his voice gravelly but strong. May I join you? These old legs don't stand as long as they used to. Julia nodded, and Antonio eased himself onto the porch swing beside her. So, this is the house, he mused, looking around. The one my son refused to destroy. Mr. Ferraz, if you're here to convince me to sell... Antonio held up a hand. I'm not here about real estate, Ms. Moura. I'm here about my son. Julia waited, watching the old man's face. Despite his age, there was still a sharpness in his eyes, the same calculating intelligence she had seen in Caio. I just got off a call with Caio's board of directors, Antonio continued. They were considering removing him as CEO because of his decision about your house. Did you know that? Julia nodded. Eduardo Vale told me. Antonio's mouth twisted. Vale, that snake has been trying to undermine my family for decades. He turned to face Julia directly. Vale offered you money for this house, didn't he? A lot of money. How did you know that? Because I know Vale, Antonio replied simply. And I'm guessing he gave you a deadline. Today, probably. Julia glanced at her watch. 11:55 a.m. I have 5 minutes left to decide. Antonio nodded. Then I'll be brief. My son won a major victory in that boardroom today, without your help, without you selling to Vale. He stood his ground and defended his decision to preserve this house, even though it cost his company millions. Julia's heart quickened. He did? Yes. And do you know why? Antonio leaned closer. Because for the first time since his mother died, Caio remembered who he really is. Not who I tried to make him. Cold, ruthless, focused only on profit. But who Isabella always believed he could be. Strong enough to do what's right, even when... It's hard. Tears pricked at Julia's eyes. I didn't do anything. I just showed him a letter from his mother. You showed him there are things more valuable than money or power, Antonio corrected her. I've spent 20 years trying to teach him the opposite. Thank God you're a better teacher than I was. Julia's phone rang. Eduardo Vale. It was noon. Antonio nodded toward the phone. You should answer that. Tell him your decision. Julia took a deep breath and picked up. Mr. Vale. Time's up, Ms. Mora, Vale said smoothly. What's it going to be? The money or the man? Julia looked at Antonio Ferraz, who gave her an encouraging nod. Neither, she replied firmly. I'm keeping my house, Mr. Vale, and Caio Ferraz can take care of himself. She ended the call before Vale could respond. Antonio chuckled, a deep, genuine sound. He won't like that, the old man said. Vale doesn't lose gracefully. I don't care, Julia said, surprised to find she meant it. This house isn't about money, it's about memories, about connections. Some things shouldn't be for sale. Antonio nodded slowly, studying her face. You know, you remind me of someone. Who? My late wife, Isabella, Antonio said softly. She had that same quiet strength, that same moral certainty. He sighed deeply. I didn't appreciate it enough when she was alive. So it took me decades to realize what I'd lost when she died, and what I'd failed to pass on to our son. He stood up with some effort. Thank you for reminding both of us, Ms. Mora. As Antonio made his way back to his waiting car, another vehicle turned onto the street, Caio's silver sports car. Father and son saw each other and both stopped. After a moment's hesitation, they approached each other in the middle of Julia's front yard. Julia couldn't hear what they said, but she saw the stiff way they stood, the formal handshake that turned unexpectedly into an awkward embrace. Antonio patted his son's shoulder before continuing to his car. Caio watched his father leave, then turned toward the house. When he saw Julia on the porch, a smile spread across his face. Not the polished, practiced smile he used in business, but something more genuine, more vulnerable. As he walked toward her, Julia felt something shift inside her. The choice she had just made suddenly seemed like the easiest decision in the world. Caio climbed the steps to Julia's porch, his heart beating faster than it had during the entire board meeting. She stood waiting for him, the afternoon sun catching in her hair. Was that your father I just saw? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Caio nodded. The first civil conversation we've had in years. He glanced back at where his father's car had been. What did he say to you? That you won in the boardroom today, Julia replied, without my help. A small smile played at the corner of Caio's mouth. Not entirely without your help. Those 3 words you whispered to me at the hearing, they changed everything. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of all that had happened in the past week hanging between them. Vale called, Julia finally said. His deadline was noon. Caio's expression tightened. And? I told him no. Her voice was steady, certain. This house isn't for sale. Not to you, not to him, not to anyone. Relief washed over Caio's face. He won't give up easily. Vale has a way of making people regret crossing him. I'm not afraid of him, Julia said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. Caio should be, Caio warned. I've known Eduardo Vale my whole life. He and my father were partners before I was born. When they split, it was ugly. Vale has held a grudge against our family ever since. Your father mentioned something about that, Julia said. about a library they disagreed over. Kayo's eyebrows shot up. He told you about Central Plaza. That was the beginning of the end of their partnership. My father wanted to preserve the old library building. Vale wanted to tear it down. Just like us with this house, Julia observed. History repeating itself, Kayo agreed. He hesitated, then asked, would you have taken his money if things had gone differently at the board meeting, if they had removed me as CEO? Julia considered the question. I don't know, she admitted. $5 million is a lot of money. It is, Kayo agreed, and no one would have blamed you for taking it. But this house has value beyond money, Julia said softly. Your mother found peace here. My grandmother lived her entire life here. Some things shouldn't be measured in dollars. Kayo's eyes held hers. I'm beginning to understand that. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Then Kayo's phone rang, breaking the spell. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It's Maria, my assistant. I should take this. As Kayo stepped away to take the call, Julia went inside to make coffee. Her mind was a whirl of emotions, relief that the threat to her house was over, confusion about her growing feelings for Kayo, and lingering worry about Vale's reaction to her refusal. When she returned to the porch with 2 mugs, Kayo was ending his call, his expression grim. Bad news, she asked, handing him a mug. Vale's moving fast, Kayo replied, accepting the coffee. He's calling a press conference for 5 o'clock today. About what? Maria doesn't know, but knowing Vale, it won't be good for me or for you. Kayo took a sip of coffee, his mind clearly racing. I need to get ahead of this somehow. Julia sat beside him on the porch swing. What can I do to help? Kayo looked at her with surprise. After everything my company put you through, after Vale's threats, you still want to help? I'm the reason you're in this mess, Julia pointed out. If I had just sold my house like everyone else in the neighborhood, then I would never have known about my mother's connection to this place. Kayo finished. I would never have seen those photographs or read her words in your grandmother's journal. I would have continued being exactly what my father made me. Cold, ruthless, caring only about the next deal. He set down his coffee mug and took her hands in his. You didn't cause this mess, Julia. You helped me find my way out of one I've been in for 20 years. The sincerity in his eyes made her breath catch. This was a different Kayo than the arrogant businessman who had sat across from her at the hearing, ready to destroy her home. Without a second thought, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Marta. Turn on Channel 7 now. Julia jumped up and hurried inside to the TV, Kayo following close behind. She flipped to Channel 7, where a breaking news banner flashed across the screen. Exclusive footage obtained by Channel 7 News, the reporter was saying. Eduardo Vale, CEO of Vale Properties, claims these images prove that Kayo Ferraz's decision to cancel the Serra Vista project was influenced by an improper relationship with Julia Mora, the schoolteacher who refused to sell her property. The screen showed grainy photos of Kayo and Julia outside her school, then another of them looking at photographs together through her living room window. Vale is scheduled to hold a press conference at 5 o'clock today, where he promises to reveal more details about what he calls a serious conflict of interest that should concern all Ferraz development investors. Julia muted the TV, her face burning with anger and embarrassment. He's making it sound like there's something inappropriate between us. It's a classic Vale move, Kayo said, his jaw tight. He can't attack the business decision anymore, not after the board backed me, so he's going after my personal life instead, and dragging you into it. What do we do? Julia asked. Kayo checked his watch. It was just after 1 o'clock. We have 4 hours before his press conference. I need to talk to my PR team. Prepare a statement. Will that be enough? No, Kayo admitted. Vale has the media eating out of his hand right now. A prepared statement won't cut through the noise. Julia paced the small living room, thinking, what about the truth? What do you mean? The real reason you changed your mind about tearing down this house. Your mother's letter, her connection to my grandmother. Julia gestured to the photo album still on the coffee table. We have proof. Kayo hesitated. That's personal, Julia. My relationship with my mother, it's not something I've ever discussed, publicly. I understand, Julia said gently, but Vale is trying to twist this into something sordid. The truth would show people what really happened, a moment of human connection, of remembering what matters most. Kaio was quiet for a long moment, considering. "You're right," he finally said. "But if we do this, we do it my way. No press conference, no prepared statements. Something more real." "What did you have in mind?" A determined look came into Kaio's eyes. "I think it's time the world saw what I've been trying to tear down all these years." By 4:30 that afternoon, news vans had begun gathering outside the building where Vale's press conference was to be held. Reporters checked their equipment and prepared their questions, anticipating the scandal Vale had promised to deliver. At exactly 4:45, phones began buzzing and ringing throughout the assembled press corps. A media alert from Faraz. Developments. Kaio Faraz was going live on the company's social media channels in 5 minutes. Inside Vale's building, the man himself received the news with fury. "He's trying to steal my thunder," Vale snarled at his PR director. "Move our press conference up." "We can't, sir," the nervous director replied. "Half the reporters are already." Switching over to watch Faraz's stream. "We need to see what he says first." Vale slammed his fist on the desk. "Fine. Put it on." Outside Julia's house, a simple setup had been arranged. Just Kaio, Julia, and a cameraman from Kaio's marketing team. No lighting, no microphones, no backdrop. Just the old house with its faded blue shutters and well-loved porch swing. "Are you sure about this?" Julia asked Kaio one last time as the cameraman counted down from 5. Kaio nodded, taking her hand. "Absolutely." The live stream began, broadcasting to thousands of viewers who had quickly tuned in after the alert. "Good afternoon," Kaio began, looking directly into the camera. "My name is Kaio Faraz. By now you've probably heard rumors about why I decided to halt the Serra Vista development project. Eduardo Vale has called a press conference to share his theory, but I thought you should hear the truth from me first." He gestured to the house behind him. "This is 145 Maple Street. It's owned by Julia Moura, a schoolteacher who has refused multiple offers to sell. Until last week, I was determined to acquire this property by any means necessary. I didn't care about its history or its meaning. It was simply an obstacle to be removed." Kaio took a deep breath. "That changed when Ms. Moura showed me this." He held up his mother's letter to the camera. "This is a letter written by my mother, Isabella Faraz, shortly before she died 22 years ago. I was 8 years old when cancer took her from us. What I never knew until Ms. Moura showed me this letter was that my mother spent her final days in this house, cared for by Julia's grandmother, Cecilia." In Vale's office, the man watched the live stream with growing dismay. "Shut it down," he ordered. "Get our tech team to hack their stream." "We can't do that, sir," his PR director protested. "It would be illegal, and besides, it's already being recorded by thousands of viewers." On screen, Kaio continued, emotion evident in his voice. "My mother wrote that this was the only place she found peace in her final days, that Cecilia Moura treated her with dignity and kindness when she needed it most." The camera panned to show Julia, who stepped forward. "My grandmother kept a journal during that time," she explained, holding up the leather-bound book. She wrote about Isabella's courage, her love for her son, and her hope that he would grow up to be not just successful but compassionate. The camera moved back to Kaio, who looked more vulnerable than anyone had ever seen him in public. "I've spent 20 years trying to make my father proud by being ruthless in business. It took 3 words from Ms. Moura, 'She knew you,' to make me remember there are more important things than the next deal." He turned to look at the house behind him. "I'm not canceling the Serra Vista project. I'm redesigning it to preserve this house and honor its history, because some connections are worth more than convenience, and some memories shouldn't be bulldozed in the name of progress." Kaio faced the camera again, his expression hardening slightly. "Mr. Vale has suggested there was something inappropriate about my decision, that Ms. Moura somehow manipulated me. The truth is much simpler and much more human. She reminded me of who my mother hoped I would become. For that, I will always be grateful." With that, Kaio nodded to the cameraman, who ended the live stream. Within seconds, Kaio's phone was flooded with messages and calls. "What's happening?" Julia asked as she watched him scrolling through his phone. A slow smile spread across Kayo's face. Vales cancelled his press conference. 1 year later, the grand opening of Serra Vista was the social event of the season. Journalists, politicians, and celebrities mingled on the beautifully landscaped grounds, admiring the innovative design that had transformed an aging neighborhood into a vibrant community while preserving its historic character. At the center of it all stood the fully restored Mura House, now serving as a community center for the development's residents. Its blue shutters had been repainted, its garden expanded, but its essential character remained unchanged, a testament to the past amid the gleaming new buildings that surrounded it. On the porch swing, away from the crowds, Kayo and Julia sat watching the celebration. "Your mother would be proud," Julia said, leaning her head against Kayo's shoulder. "And my grandmother would be amazed to see her house looking so beautiful again." Kayo smiled, his arm around Julia's waist. "I think they somehow knew we'd end up here. Why else would your grandmother have kept that letter all those years?" The past year had transformed both their lives. After the live stream, public opinion had swung dramatically in Kayo's favor. The story of his mother's connection to the house had touched people in a way that no PR campaign could have. Investors had returned. The Serra Vista redesign had won architectural awards even before breaking ground, and Faraz Development's stock had reached an all-time high. But the biggest change had been personal. Kayo had slowly, cautiously allowed himself to open up, first to Julia, then to others. His relationship with his father had begun to heal as they found a new way to work together, with Antonio offering wisdom and experience while respecting his son's different approach to business. And then there was Julia. Their connection had deepened gradually, built on shared memories of two women who had never known how their lives would one day bring their loved ones together. "By the way," Kayo said, reaching into his pocket, "I have something for you." He pulled out a small velvet box. Julia's eyes widened. "Kayo." He opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. "I know it's only been a year," he said, suddenly nervous. "And I understand if you think it's too soon, but I've spent 20 years making decisions based on profit margins and market forecasts. For once in my life, I want to make one based purely on love." Tears filled Julia's eyes as Kayo slid off the porch swing and knelt before her. "Julia Mura, you changed my life with 3 words. Now I have 4 for you. Will you marry me?" Julia's smile was radiant through her tears. "Yes," she whispered, pulling him up to sit beside her again. "Yes, I will." As Kayo slipped the ring onto her finger, a familiar figure approached the porch. Eduardo Valle, looking older and less confident than he had a year ago, stopped at the bottom of the steps. "Congratulations," he said, his voice lacking its usual bite. "Both on the engagement and on Serra Vista. It's impressive what you've created here." Kayo stood, keeping Julia's hand in his. "Thank you, Eduardo. I'm surprised to see you here." Vale shrugged. "Your father invited me, said it was time to bury old grudges." He glanced at the renovated house behind them. "Sometimes preserving the past is better than demolishing it. It seems both you and your father learned that lesson before I did." He nodded to them both, then moved back toward the main celebration. Kayo and Julia watched him go, then turned to each other. "Do you think he's sincere?" Julia asked. "With Vale, it's hard to tell," Kayo replied, "but it doesn't matter anymore. He can't hurt us now." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over Serra Vista, guests started gathering for the official ribbon-cutting ceremony. Antonio Faraz made his way to the porch, moving more easily with his cane than he had a year ago. "They're waiting." "For you, son," he told Kayo. "You should be the one to cut the ribbon." Kayo shook his head. "Not me," he said, turning to Julia. "Us. None of this would exist without her." Antonio smiled, the pride evident in his eyes. Not the cold approval Kayo had sought for so many years, but genuine warmth. "Your mother would have loved her," he said quietly. "I think she did," Kayo replied, remembering his mother's letter. In a way, she knew this day would come. Hand in hand, Kayo and Julia walked toward the waiting crowd. the house that had brought them together standing solid and proud behind them. What had begun with 3 whispered words had blossomed into something neither of them could have imagined, a love story built on memories, forgiveness, and the courage to choose grace over power. As they reached the ribbon stretched across the main entrance to Serra Vista, Caio handed Julia one handle of the ceremonial scissors. Together they cut the ribbon, officially opening not just a development, but a new chapter in both their lives. And somewhere, they both felt certain. Isabella and Cecilia were smiling, the end.